The silence in the diner pressed against my eardrums like cotton soaked in cold water. Even the usual clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed muted tonight, as if the very walls understood that something fragile sat in the corner booth. I could smell the lingering traces of coffee grounds and bacon grease, but underneath it all was something else, something metallic and sharp that made my throat tighten. The little girl hadn't moved in 3 hours. She sat perfectly still, her pale hands folded on the red vinyl tabletop, staring at nothing. Her dark hair fell in waves around her face, and her skin had the translucent quality of someone who hadn't eaten in weeks. The untouched glass of milk beside her had long since warmed to room temperature, and the sandwich I'd brought her earlier remained wrapped in its paper, forgotten. I wiped down the same table for the third time, my dish rag moving in slow circles as I watched her from the corner of my eye. Every instinct I'd developed from years of waitressing screamed that something was wrong, not just wrong, but dangerously so. The child's stillness wasn't the fidgety quiet of a bored kid. It was the absolute motionlessness of someone who had stopped hoping. The bell above the door chimed, and I glanced up to see a man entering. He moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to command, his dark coat immaculate despite the October chill outside. His eyes swept the diner with calculating precision before settling on the corner booth. On the girl. My breath caught in my throat. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with angular features that belonged in a Renaissance painting rather than a Brooklyn diner at midnight. His black hair was pushed back from his face, revealing sharp cheekbones and eyes so dark they looked almost black in the fluorescent lighting. But it wasn't his appearance that made my hands tremble. It was the way he looked at the child. Like she was everything that mattered in the world, and like he was terrified of losing her. "Lily," he said, and his voice carried the weight of mountains. The girl's head turned slowly, as if the simple act of acknowledgement required tremendous effort. When she saw him, something flickered in her expression, a brief moment of recognition that faded almost immediately back to that devastating emptiness. I found myself moving toward their booth before I'd consciously decided to. My sneakers squeaked against the checkered linoleum, and the sound seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed space. "Is she all right?" I heard myself ask, though I knew it was none of my business. The man's gaze snapped to me, and I felt pinned beneath the intensity of his stare. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, the distant sound of traffic on the street, and my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. "She hasn't eaten," he said finally, and there was something raw in his voice that made my chest ache. "In months." I looked at the child, Lily, and saw the truth of it in the hollow of her cheeks, the way her clothes hung loose on her small frame. But there was something else, something that tugged at the edges of my memory like a half-remembered dream. "What does she like?" I asked, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. He blinked, as if the question had caught him off guard. She loved strawberries and warm milk with honey." Without thinking, I slipped into the booth across from Lily. The vinyl was cold against my legs, and I could smell something faintly sweet emanating from the child, like vanilla and something else I couldn't quite place. "Hey there," I said softly, keeping my voice low and gentle. "I'm Hannah." Lily's eyes met mine for the first time, and I felt something shift in the air between us. Her pupils were larger than they should have been in the bright diner lighting, and there was an otherworldly quality to the way she tilted her head, as if she was listening to something I couldn't hear. "Would you like me to get you some strawberries?" I asked. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice so quiet I had to strain to hear it, she whispered. The music stopped. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The words hit me like a physical blow, though I couldn't understand why. Somewhere in the depths of my mind, a melody began to play, faint and haunting, like a lullaby half remembered from childhood. "What music?" I managed to ask. Lily's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "Mama's music box. It played our song. But now—" She trailed off, her small hands clenching into fists on the table. The melody in my head grew stronger, more insistent. My throat felt tight, and I had the strangest urge to hum along with the phantom tune. Instead, I reached across the table and gently covered one of her hands with mine. Her skin was cold, not just cool, but genuinely cold, like touching marble in winter. But instead of pulling away, I found myself squeezing gently. "Sometimes," I said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside me, "when music stops, we have to make our own." And then, without conscious thought, I began to hum. The melody that emerged was the same one I'd been hearing in my head, a slow, haunting tune in a minor key that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. I had no idea where I knew it from, but it felt as natural as breathing. Lily's eyes widened and she sat up straighter in the booth. The man beside her went completely still, his face draining of color. "How do you know that song?" he asked, and his voice was barely above a whisper. I stopped humming, my heart racing. I don't know. I looked at Lily, who was staring at me with something that might have been hope. It felt right. For the first time since I'd seen her, Lily smiled. It was small and fragile, but it transformed her entire face. "That's Mama's song," she said. "The one from her music box." The man was studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. There was something predatory in his gaze now, but also something else. A desperate kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. "Who are you?" he asked. "Just a waitress," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't entirely true. There was something more, something I couldn't quite grasp, lurking at the edges of my consciousness. Lily tugged on my hand, and I looked down at her. "Will you sing it again?" she asked. I nodded and began to hum once more. This time, Lily joined in with a voice like silver bells, creating a harmony that seemed to resonate in my bones. The man watched us both, his dark eyes unreadable. When we finished, Lily picked up the glass of milk and took a small sip. It was the first time she'd moved to nourish herself all evening. "Better?" I asked. She nodded, then reached for the sandwich. As she unwrapped it with careful fingers, she looked up at me again. "What's your last name?" she asked. "Martinez," I said. "Hannah Martinez." The man's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet diner. He was staring at me like I was a ghost, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "Martinez," he repeated, and there was something broken in the way he said it. "Yes," I said slowly. "Why?" But before he could answer, Lily spoke up again, her voice stronger now that she'd had some milk. "Papa, she knows Mama's song, the one from the box that got burned." My heart stopped beating for a full second. "Burned?" The man, Papa, Lily had called him, closed his eyes as if in pain. "The music box was destroyed in the attack that killed my wife. No one else should know that melody." "Attack?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "3 months ago," he said, opening his eyes to look at me again. "My wife Elena was killed by rival clan members who wanted to hurt me. They burned everything. Our home, her belongings, everything that connected us to our life together." His voice grew harder. "Including a guardian who died trying to protect her." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Guardian. The word echoed in my mind, carrying weight I couldn't understand. "My father," I heard myself say, though I had no idea why. "My father died 3 months ago, in Philadelphia. I came to New York because—" I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. because I was running from something I couldn't name, because I'd been having nightmares about fire and screaming, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of violence that made no sense. The man leaned forward, his dark eyes boring into mine. "What was your father's name?" "David," I whispered. "David Martinez." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Lily had stopped eating her sandwich, halfway to her mouth as she looked between us. "David Martinez," the man repeated slowly. "The Guardian." "I don't understand," I said, but even as I spoke the words, pieces were clicking into place in my mind. My father's mysterious trips, his insistence that I learn self-defense, the way he'd always seemed to be watching for something, waiting for some invisible threat, the locked drawer in his desk that I'd never been allowed to open. "Your father," the man said, and his voice was gentler now, "died protecting my family. He was the last of an ancient bloodline sworn to guard mine. And you." He reached into his coat and pulled out something that made my breath catch. It was a small silver locket, tarnished with age and slightly dented as if it had survived some terrible ordeal. "You're his daughter," he said, "which means the Pact recognizes you. It's why Lily responds to you, why you know the song." He set the locket on the table between us. "This belonged to your father. I found it after." With trembling fingers, I reached for the locket. The moment my skin touched the silver, warmth flooded through me, and the phantom melody in my head grew so loud it was almost overwhelming. Images flashed behind my eyes. My father, younger and stronger than I remembered, standing beside a woman with kind eyes and dark hair. Lily's mother. "The blood pact," I whispered, the words coming from some deep well of knowledge I didn't know I possessed. "Yes," the man said, "your bloodline bound to mine, guardian to protected, for over 300 years." I looked at Lily, who was watching me with those two large eyes, and suddenly understood why I'd felt so drawn to her. Why her pain had called to something fundamental in my nature. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," he said, and there was something that might have been relief in his voice, "that you're the only one who can help her heal. The only one who can—" The lights in the diner suddenly flickered and went out. In the darkness, I heard Lily's sharp intake of breath and the man's muttered curse. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow, and I could see his face clearly for the first time. His eyes weren't just dark. They were completely black, with no visible iris or pupil. And when he smiled, revealing teeth that were definitely not human, I finally understood what I'd walked into. "My name is Cassian," he said, and his voice carried the weight of centuries. "And I think it's time you knew the truth about what your father really was. What you really—" The diner's front door exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. The emergency lights cast everything in hellish red shadows as three figures stepped through the destroyed doorway. They moved with the same fluid grace as Cassian, but where his presence had felt dangerous yet controlled, theirs radiated pure menace. The smell of sulfur and burnt metal filled the air, making my eyes water. I felt Cassian's hand close around my wrist, his grip like iron. "Stay down," he hissed, but I was already sliding lower in the booth, pulling Lily with me. Her small body trembled against mine, and I could feel her rapid heartbeat through her thin shirt. "Well, well," said the leader of the three, a woman with platinum blonde hair and eyes like chips of ice. The infamous Cassian, hiding in a human diner like some common refugee. Her gaze swept over our booth, lingering on Lily with predatory hunger. "And he's brought the little halfling with him." Cassian rose from the booth with lethal grace, positioning himself between us and the intruders. "Vincent sent you, I assume." "Vincent sends his regards," said one of the men, pulling what looked like a silver blade from beneath his coat. The metal gleamed wetly in the red light, along with a message about unpaid debts. My father's locket burned against my palm where I clutched it. Images flashed through my mind. Not memories, but something deeper. Knowledge passed down through blood and bone, ancient instincts awakening like embers stirred to flame. I knew, without understanding how, that these weren't just vampires. They were something older, more vicious. Clan Calibris, my mind supplied, though I had no idea where the information came from. The debt was paid when Elena died. Cassian's voice dropped to something barely human. Or haven't you spilled enough innocent blood? Oh, but you see? The woman smiled, revealing fangs that caught the emergency lighting. Your wife's death was just the interest. The principal remains. Her eyes found mine across the diner. Though I admit, we didn't expect to find such an interesting bonus. Ice water flooded my veins. They knew who I was. Somehow, impossibly, they knew. She has nothing to do with this, Cassian said, but his voice carried a note of desperation that made my stomach clench. The Guardian's daughter has everything to do with this. The second man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Did you really think we wouldn't notice when the bloodline awakened? When the Pact recognized its new keeper? The locket in my hand was burning now, actually burning, but I couldn't let go. Power thrummed through it, through me, awakening pathways in my mind I never knew existed. I could feel Lily's life force, weak but persistent, tied to mine by silver threads of magic. And beyond that, deeper and stronger, I felt Cassian. His rage, his fear, his desperate love for his daughter. Run, Lily whispered against my ear, so quietly only I could hear. The back door. I can distract them. But even as she spoke, I knew I couldn't leave her. The bond between us was too strong, too fundamental. It would be like trying to cut out my own heart. No, I whispered back, and pulled my father's locket over my head. The moment the chain settled around my neck, the world exploded into sensation. I could feel every vampire in the room, their alien hunger singing against my consciousness. But more than that, I could feel the weight of generations settling on my shoulders. Every guardian who had come before, their knowledge and instincts flowing into me like water into a dry riverbed. The first attacker lunged at Cassian with inhuman speed, silver blade aimed at his heart. They collided in a blur of movement that sent tables and chairs scattering. The sound of their impact was like thunder. Now would be good, Cassian growled as he twisted away from a swipe that would have taken his head off. I stood up from the booth, and the world slowed around me. My father's training, sessions I'd dismissed as paranoid self-defense lessons, suddenly made perfect sense. Every movement, every principle he'd drilled into me had been preparation for this moment. The female vampire turned toward me, her face transforming into something bestial and terrible. Come here, little guardian. Let's see if your blood tastes as sweet as your father's did. But as she stepped forward, Lily did something I never expected. The little girl, who hadn't spoken above a whisper for months, suddenly threw back her head and screamed. It wasn't a human sound. It was pure, primal terror given voice, but underneath it was something else. Power. Raw, unfocused power that hit the attacking vampires like a physical blow and sent them staggering backward. She's manifesting, Cassian shouted over the chaos, pride and fear warring in his voice. The bond is triggering her abilities. The blonde vampire recovered first, snarling as she launched herself not at Cassian, but at Lily, at the child who had just revealed herself to be far more than human. I moved without thinking, my father's locket blazing against my chest. Time seemed to stretch as I threw myself between the vampire and Lily, my hands coming up in a defensive posture I'd practiced 1,000 times but never understood. The vampire's claws raked across my forearms, drawing lines of fire, but they didn't penetrate deeply. The locket's power was protecting me, creating a barrier of silver light around my body. Her eyes widened in shock and rage. "Impossible," she hissed. "You're untrained, unawakened." "Maybe," I said, and felt a smile that wasn't entirely my own cross my lips. "But I'm still a Martinez." I grabbed her wrist as she struck again, and power flowed from the locket through my hands into her flesh. She screamed as silver light crawled up her arm like living flame, burning away whatever dark magic animated her. Behind me, I heard the sounds of Cassian's fight intensifying. Glass shattered, metal rang against metal, and the smell of spilled blood filled the air. But I couldn't look away from the vampire in front of me, whose face was contorting with pain and something else. Fear. "Kill her!" she shrieked to her companions. "Kill the Guardian before she fully awakens." But it was too late for that. The power was already singing in my veins, ancient knowledge unfolding in my mind like flowers blooming in fast forward. I knew now why my father had seemed so sad in his final years, so burdened. He'd known this day would come, had known he was training me not just to defend myself, but to defend others, to be what he had been, a guardian. The second male vampire broke away from his battle with Cassian and rushed toward us. His blade gleamed as he raised it, aiming for my heart with surgical precision. Lily's small hand slipped into mine, and suddenly her power joined with mine, amplifying the locket's magic until the entire diner blazed with silver light. The vampire's blade struck my chest and simply stopped, held back by a barrier of pure will made manifest. "Together," Lily whispered, and her voice carried harmonics that resonated in my bones. "Like Mama and your Papa." Understanding flooded through me. My father hadn't just protected Elena from the attack 3 months ago. He'd been working with her, their powers intertwined the same way mine and Lily's were now. Guardian and protected. Two halves of an ancient whole. The vampire pressed harder against my barrier, his face twisted with rage. But the silver light was spreading, creeping up his blade toward his hands. Where it touched him, his flesh began to smoke and burn. "Vincent will kill you for this," the blonde vampire snarled, but she was backing toward the ruined door now, dragging her wounded companion. "The halfling cannot be allowed to reach maturity. The old ways cannot return." The old ways. Cassian appeared beside me, his dark coat torn and bloodied, but his eyes blazing with something that might have been hope. Never left. They were just waiting for the right guardian. The three attackers retreated through the broken doorway, but the blonde turned back one final time. "This isn't over, Moretti. Vincent has resources you can't imagine, and when he comes for the girl, your pet guardian won't be enough to stop him." Then they were gone, vanishing into the night like smoke. The silence that followed was deafening. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The diner was destroyed, tables overturned, windows shattered, the smell of supernatural battle heavy in the air. "We need to go," Cassian said urgently. "The human authorities cannot find us here." But I was staring at Lily, who was glowing faintly with residual power, her eyes bright for the first time since I'd met her. She looked like what she was, half vampire, half human, and entirely extraordinary. "Are you hurt?" I asked her, checking her arms and face for injuries. She shook her head, then looked up at me with an expression far too old for her years. "The music box," she said quietly. "I remember now. Mama said if anything happened to her, the song would find its way to the next guardian, that we'd be safe." My throat tightened. "And are you? Safe?" She considered this with the gravity of someone much older, then nodded. "With you, yes. The bond knows." Cassian was watching us both with an expression I couldn't read. "The safe house," he said finally. "We need to get to the safe house. Vincent won't stop with one failed attack." "Safe house?" I looked up at him, suddenly aware that my entire life had just changed forever. I can't just. I have a job? An apartment? Had. He corrected gently. You had those things. Now you have something more important. His eyes met mine, and I saw centuries of weariness there, but also a fragile kind of hope. You have a purpose, and whether you're ready or not, you have enemies who will never stop hunting you. The sirens were getting closer. Through the shattered windows, I could see the red and blue flash of emergency lights painting the street. Where is this safe house? I asked. Upstate, he said. A fortress that's been in my family for 200 years, warded, defended, and hidden from human eyes. He paused. It was where Elena wanted to raise Lily, before she was murdered by the same creatures who had just tried to kill us all. I looked down at Lily again, at this little girl who had somehow become the center of my universe in the span of a single evening. The bond between us hummed with protective instinct, with a love so fierce it should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like coming home. Okay, I said, and pulled her close as Cassian moved toward the back of the diner. But I want answers. All of them. What Vincent wants, why my father never told me the truth, how this bond really works. You'll have them, Cassian promised, but first, we survive. We slipped out through the kitchen, moving silently through the alley behind the diner. In the distance, I could hear police radios crackling, officers coordinating their response to what they would undoubtedly classify as a gas explosion or some other mundane tragedy. They would never know that tonight, in a Brooklyn diner, the ancient war between the Guardians and those who would prey on the innocent had begun again. As we walked, Lily's hand secure in mine and Cassian leading us through shadows that seemed to bend around his form, I hummed softly under my breath. The melody from the music box, the song that had somehow bridged the gap between a dead woman and her grieving daughter, between my old life and my new purpose. Behind us, the diner burned with more than mortal flame. And ahead of us, in a fortress built to withstand siege, waited answers that would reshape everything I thought I knew about the world. The music had stopped, Lily had said. But as we disappeared into the night, I realized that wasn't true at all. The music had simply found a new voice, a new guardian to carry its protective power forward. And this time, I wouldn't let it be silenced. The drive upstate took 3 hours, most of it on dark country roads that didn't appear on any GPS. Cassian drove with supernatural precision, never once checking the mirrors or slowing for curves that should have required it. Lily slept against my shoulder in the back seat, her breathing finally deep and regular for the first time since I'd met her. The fortress, when it finally appeared through the trees, was nothing like what I'd expected. Instead of some Gothic castle, it was a sprawling modern structure built into the side of a mountain, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that somehow managed to look both elegant and impregnable. Moonlight reflected off surfaces that appeared to be made of something stronger than glass. "Welcome to Raven's Hollow," Cassian said, as we pulled through gates that opened without any visible mechanism. "Home." As we approached the main entrance, motion sensors triggered lights that revealed the true scope of the place. The fortress stretched back into the mountain itself, multiple levels carved directly into the stone. Gardens terraced down the slope, and I caught glimpses of what looked like training grounds and defensive installations hidden among the landscaping. "How many people live here?" I asked, gently shaking Lily awake as we came to a stop. "Depends on the season," Cassian said. "Right now, maybe 20. Security team, household staff, a few other allies." Other vampires, he meant. The thought should have terrified me, but the locket around my neck pulsed with warmth, and I felt only curious anticipation. "Papa?" Lily said sleepily. "Are we home now?" "Yes, little star," he said softly. We're home. The main doors opened before we reached them, revealing a woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes. She rushed forward, her face breaking into a smile of pure relief when she saw Lily. Thank the ancients, she breathed. When you didn't return at the usual time, we feared the worst. We had some complications, Martha, Cassian said, but his tone was warm. I'd like you to meet Hannah Martinez. She's going to be staying with us for a while. Martha's eyes went wide as she took in my appearance. Torn clothes, healing claw marks on my arms, and most tellingly, the ancient locket gleaming against my throat. A guardian? She whispered reverently. A true guardian, after all these years. Still figuring that part out, I admitted, suddenly feeling awkward. I'm really just... You're the reason Lily spoke tonight, Martha interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. The reason she ate, the reason she's alive. She reached out and took my hands in both of hers. You are exactly what you're meant to be, child. Welcome to Raven's Hollow. The interior of the fortress was a study in contrasts. Ancient stone walls hung with modern art, cutting-edge technology seamlessly integrated with hand-carved wooden furniture that had to be centuries old. Everything spoke of a family that had adapted and survived through countless generations. Your room is in the east wing, Cassian explained as we climbed a staircase carved from what looked like a single piece of granite. Lily's is just down the hall, if she needs you. I will, Lily said matter-of-factly. The nightmares are coming back, but they're different now. Less scary. We passed doorways that opened onto rooms I couldn't quite glimpse clearly. Something about the shadows seemed to shift and blur, protecting the privacy of whoever lived there. But I caught impressions of comfortable spaces, lived in and well-loved despite their obvious luxury. My room, when Cassian opened the door, took my breath away. The far wall was entirely glass, offering a view of the valley below that stretched for miles. The space itself was larger than my entire apartment in Brooklyn, with a sitting area arranged around a fireplace and a bed that could have slept 4 people comfortably. There are clothes in the wardrobe, he said, then hesitated at the threshold. Hannah, what happened tonight? It changes things. For all of us. The bond between you and Lily, it's not something that can be undone or ignored. I understand, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I did. At least, I think I'm beginning to. He nodded slowly. Tomorrow, I'll show you the archives. Your father's journal, the records of the Guardian bloodline, everything we know about Vincent's plans. His expression darkened. Because, make no mistake, tonight was just the beginning. After he left, I stood at the window looking out at the valley, my mind reeling with everything that had happened. 6 hours ago, I'd been nobody special, a waitress running from a past I couldn't even remember clearly. Now I was apparently the heir to some ancient magical legacy, bonded to a half-vampire child, and living in a fortress owned by creatures out of legend. The locket around my neck pulsed with gentle warmth, and for a moment I could swear I felt my father's presence. Not a ghost or a spirit, but the echo of his love and his determination, woven into the very fabric of the magic he'd passed down to me. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Come in, I called. Lily peeked around the doorframe, her hair loose around her shoulders and wearing pajamas covered in cartoon stars. Despite everything supernatural about her, in that moment she looked exactly like what she was, a little girl who'd had a scary night. I can't sleep, she admitted quietly. Every time I close my eyes, I see the bad vampires again. Come here, I said, settling into one of the chairs by the fireplace and opening my arms. She ran to me with the enthusiasm of a normal child, curling up in my lap and tucking her head under my chin. Her weight was comforting, solid and real in a world that suddenly seemed full of impossible things. Will you hum Mama's song? She asked. I began the melody I somehow knew by heart, and Lily's breathing gradually deepened as she relaxed against me. But just as I thought she'd fallen asleep, she spoke again. Hannah? I'm glad it's you, she said simply. The bond could have chosen anyone from your family line, but I'm glad it chose you. My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. How do you know about how the bond works? Mama told me stories, she said sleepily, about the guardians and how they're chosen. She said the magic knows who has the strongest heart, who will love us the most. She tilted her head up to look at me. I can feel how much you love me already. It's warm, like sunshine. I pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in her sweet vanilla scent. I do love you, I realized with surprise. I don't understand it, but I do. That's how it works, she said, settling back against my chest. Love first, understanding later. As she finally drifted off to sleep in my arms, I found myself staring out at the valley again. Somewhere out there, Vincent and his allies were planning their next move. And here, in this fortress, I was apparently the key to keeping Lily safe from whatever they had planned. The magnitude of it should have overwhelmed me. Instead, as I held the sleeping child and felt the ancient power humming through my veins, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt ready. Ready for whatever came next, whatever battles lay ahead. Because for the first time in my life, I had something worth fighting for. Someone who needed me not just to survive, but to thrive. The music box melody played itself out in my mind as I carried Lily to her own room, tucking her into a bed shaped like a crescent moon. As I pulled her covers up to her chin, she mumbled something that made me freeze. The other one is coming, she said, still more asleep than awake. The one who should have died. Mama's friend is coming home. Before I could ask what she meant, her breathing evened out into the deep rhythm of true sleep. But her words echoed in my mind as I returned to my own room, and I had the unsettling feeling that our troubles were just beginning. Outside my window, something moved in the shadows between the trees, too large to be human, too fluid to be anything natural. The guards Cassian had mentioned, I hoped, rather than another attack. But as I finally settled into bed, my father's locket warm against my skin and Lily's presence a comforting glow in my consciousness, I realized it didn't matter. Whatever was coming, whoever was coming, we would face it together. The Guardian bloodline had awakened, and this time, we wouldn't be caught unprepared. A sound split the night, sharp, piercing like metal scraping stone, followed by something that might have been a howl. My hand found the locket instinctively as I sat up in bed, every instinct screaming danger. Then I heard it, Lily's scream, high and terrified, coming from somewhere deep in the fortress. I was running before I'd fully awakened, bare feet slapping against cold stone as I followed the sound of her voice. Behind me, I could hear doors slamming open, voices shouting, the fortress coming alive with... The screaming cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of splintering wood and inhuman roars that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. I reached Lily's door to find it hanging open, the frame cracked like something massive had torn through it. Her room was empty, the crescent moon bed overturned, windows shattered inward. Glass crunched under my feet as I stepped inside, and the smell hit me. Sulfur and burnt metal, the same signature scent from the diner attack. "Lily!" I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the fortress's stone walls. Cassian appeared behind me, moving faster than humanly possible. His face went white as he took in the destruction. "The panic room," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled terror. "She knows to go to the panic room if anything happens." But even as he spoke, we could hear sounds of battle echoing from deeper in the fortress. Steel ringing against steel, the wet sound of violence, screams that definitely weren't Lily's, but somehow made everything worse. "Vincent," Cassian snarled. "He's inside. How the hell did he get past the wards?" My locket was burning against my chest now, power flowing through me in waves that made my vision blur. But underneath the magical energy, I felt something else. Lily's terror, sharp and immediate, coming from somewhere below us. "The basement levels," I said, grabbing Cassian's arm. "She's down there. I can feel her through the bond." We ran through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past rooms where shadows moved wrong and the air itself felt heavy with supernatural conflict. Martha appeared at an intersection, her kind face now grim and determined. "They came through the old tunnels," she reported breathlessly. "Somehow bypassed every ward we have. Vincent brought half his clan, maybe 20 fighters." "Where's the backup?" Cassian demanded. "Cut off. They hit the communications array first, then the power grid. We're on emergency lighting only." Martha's eyes found mine. "But the old protections are responding to the Guardian's presence. The fortress is waking up." As if to prove her point, the stone walls around us began to emit a faint silver glow, the same color as my locket's light. Ancient symbols carved into the granite started to pulse with magical energy, and I could feel the building itself responding to my presence, recognizing me as a protector. "The panic room," Cassian said tersely. "How do we get there?" "Service elevator at the end of this hall," Martha replied. "But Hannah..." A new sound cut through the chaos, not screaming this time, but singing. A child's voice, high and pure, carrying a melody I recognized with bone-deep certainty. Lily was singing her mother's lullaby. "She's calling for me," I whispered, and suddenly I knew exactly where she was. Not in the panic room at all, but somewhere much more dangerous. The old chamber, the one with the music box. Cassian's face went gray. "That's impossible. That room was sealed after Elena died. No one can get in." But I was already moving, following the pull of the bond and the sound of Lily's voice. The locket around my neck blazed with silver fire, and I could feel my father's power fully awakening within me. Not just the protective magic I'd used at the diner, but something deeper. Combat training that had been buried in my subconscious, reflexes honed by generations of guardians who had faced this exact enemy. We descended through levels of the fortress I hadn't known existed, past rooms filled with weapons and artifacts that hummed with their own power. The singing grew stronger as we went deeper, and with it came another sound, Vincent's voice, smooth and mocking. "Such a pretty song, little halfling. Did your dead mother teach it to you?" The main chamber, when we finally reached it, was exactly as I'd seen in the fragmented memories the locket had shared. Circular, carved from living rock, with a raised platform in the center where an ornate music box sat open, its mechanism exposed and silent. Vincent stood beside the platform, one clawed hand resting on Lily's shoulder as she sat cross-legged on the stone floor. She was still singing, but I could see the tracks of tears on her cheeks, and her small body shook with exhaustion. "Hello, Guardian," Vincent said without turning around. He was tall and elegant, dressed in an expensive suit that somehow remained pristine, despite the battle raging above us. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." "Let her go," I said, stepping into the chamber. The locket's power filled the space with silver light, and the ancient symbols carved into the walls began to glow in response. "Oh, I don't think so." Vincent smiled, and his fangs caught the magical light. "You see, the little halfling has something that belongs to me, something her mother stole when she fled all those years ago." "Elena stole nothing." Cassian stepped up beside me, his own power radiating outward like heat from a furnace. "She was your daughter-in-law, not your property." "She was the key to controlling the old bloodlines," Vincent corrected. a bridge between human and vampire magic that could have given us dominion over both species. Instead, she chose to run, to hide, to waste her potential playing house with you. Lily's song faltered, and Vincent's grip on her shoulder tightened. But now I have her daughter, and with the right persuasion, young Lily will learn to use her abilities for more worthy purposes. The rage that flowed through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not hot and wild, but cold and absolute. The fury of every guardian who had come before, focused into a single point of protective determination. "You will not touch her," I said, and my voice carried harmonics that made the chamber walls resonate. Vincent finally turned to look at me fully, and I saw his face change as he took in the power radiating from my locket. "Impossible," he breathed. The Martinez line died out. I made sure of that. "You killed my father," I said, stepping closer. "But you didn't kill me. An oversight I intend to correct." Vincent snarled and launched himself at me with inhuman speed. But I was ready for him. 30 years of self-defense training that I'd thought was just my father's paranoia suddenly made perfect sense. I sidestepped his charge and brought my knee up into his ribs with enough force to crack bone. He staggered, shocked that a human could move fast enough to counter a vampire's attack. What he didn't understand was that I wasn't just human anymore. The bond with Lily, the awakened guardian magic, my father's legacy, all of it had transformed me into something new. "Lily, to me," I called. She scrambled toward me, but Vincent recovered faster than I'd expected. His hand shot out, claws aimed at her throat. The world slowed. I could see every detail with crystal clarity: the malice in Vincent's eyes, the terror on Lily's face, Cassian moving to intercept but too far away to matter. Time stopped. I threw myself between them, the locket's power exploding outward in a barrier of pure silver light. Vincent's claws struck the magical shield and stopped, held back by power that had protected the innocent for 1,000 years. But the effort cost me. I felt something tear inside my chest, and warm blood began to soak through my shirt. The barrier wavered. "Strong," Vincent admitted, pressing harder against my defense. "But not strong enough. You're untrained, little guardian. All power and no finesse." He was right. I could feel my strength ebbing, the magical barrier beginning to crack under his assault. In moments, he would break through. And then, Lily's small hand slipped into mine. Power flowed between us, her hybrid nature amplifying my guardian magic, until the entire chamber blazed with silver fire. Vincent screamed as the light seared his flesh, driving him back from us. "Together," Lily whispered, echoing her words from the diner, "like Mama and your Papa." I understood then. The music box, Elena's lullaby, my father's sacrifice. It had all been preparation for this moment. Not just to protect Lily, but to teach her to protect herself. "The song," I said urgently. "Sing your mother's song." Lily's voice rose again, pure and strong, but now I joined her in harmony. Two voices, guardian and protected, weaving magic that had slumbered in this chamber for months. The music box on the platform began to move, its mechanisms turning without any visible power source. The melody we sang resonated with the ancient artifact, and suddenly the chamber was filled with Elena's presence. Not a ghost, but the echo of love and sacrifice embedded in the very stones. Vincent recoiled as if struck. "No," he snarled. "She's dead. I made sure she was dead." But Elena's love lived on in the music, in her daughter's voice, in the bond that connected all of us. The chamber walls pulsed with silver light, and I realized that the fortress itself was responding, every ward and protection that had ever been laid down activating at once. "You cannot have her," Elena's voice seemed to whisper from the music box. "She is protected by powers older than your ambition." Vincent lunged again, desperation overriding strategy. But this time, Cassian was ready. Moving with the fluid grace of a predator, he intercepted Vincent mid-leap, and they crashed together into the chamber wall. The fight that followed was brutal and swift. Vampire against vampire, raw power against ancient fury. But Cassian had something Vincent didn't: a father's love, and a guardian's power flowing through the bond that connected all of us. When it ended, Vincent lay motionless on the chamber floor, silver light still crackling over his body from where Cassian's claws had found their mark. "Is he dead?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "No," Cassian said quietly, "but he'll be unconscious for hours, long enough for us to decide what to do with him." Lily was crying now, great sobbing tears of relief and exhaustion. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her small body shake against mine. "It's over," I whispered into her hair. "You're safe now." But as I held her, I could hear sounds from the upper levels of the fortress, running feet, shouting voices, the cleanup beginning. Vincent's attack had been defeated, but the war he represented was far from over. "What happens now?" I asked Cassian. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, centuries of weariness visible in his expression. But there was also hope there, fragile but growing stronger. "Now we rebuild," he said simply. "The old alliances, the protective networks, the balance between our worlds. It will take time, but with a guardian to anchor the magic." He trailed off, looking at me with something that might have been wonder. "You saved us all tonight, Hannah. Not just Lily, but the future itself." I thought about my old life in Brooklyn, the apartment I'd never see again, the job that suddenly seemed meaningless. All of it felt like it belonged to someone else now. "I need to call in sick tomorrow," I said, and despite everything, Lily giggled against my shoulder. "You don't work there anymore," she pointed out with the practical logic of a child. "No," I agreed, looking around the chamber where Elena's music box still played its haunting melody. "I guess I have a new job now." Martha appeared in the doorway, her face relieved when she saw us all alive. "The fortress is secure," she reported. "Vincent's people are either captured or fled. And Hannah—" She paused, looking at me with something like awe. "The old wards are singing. They recognize you as the true guardian. The fortress accepts you." As if to prove her point, the silver light in the chamber walls pulsed once, warmly, like a heartbeat. "Welcome home," Cassian said softly. And for the first time in years, I truly felt like I was. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of Raven's Hollow, morning sunlight streaming through windows that no longer needed to be warded against supernatural threats. The smell of pancakes filled the air, and I could hear Lily's laughter echoing from the garden where she was playing with the other children who now lived safely within our walls. The war with Vincent's faction had ended 6 months ago, not with another battle but with a treaty. Turns out that having a fully awakened guardian willing to protect both human and vampire interests made negotiation a lot more appealing than continued conflict. "More coffee?" Martha asked, appearing at my elbow with a pot that smelled like heaven. "Please," I said, holding out my cup. The locket around my neck pulsed with gentle warmth, no longer the burning beacon of emergency magic, but a comfortable presence that connected me to every soul under our protection. Cassian entered the kitchen, dressed for his morning meetings with the regional council. The governance of supernatural human relations had gotten a lot more complicated since the old barriers started coming down, but also a lot more hopeful. "Any word from the Philadelphia delegation?" I asked. "They should arrive this afternoon," he said, stealing a piece of bacon from the plate I was arranging. "Your cousin Marcus is looking forward to meeting you." My cousin. The thought still amazed me. When we'd started reaching out to other guardian bloodlines, I discovered I wasn't nearly as alone as I'd thought. The Martinez legacy had branches all over the world, and they were all slowly awakening to their heritage. Aunt Hannah! Lily burst through the kitchen door, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Come see what I made. At 7 years old, she was thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible that first night in the diner. Her hybrid nature, once a source of fear and weakness, had become her greatest strength. She could speak to both sides of our strange new world, bridging gaps that had existed for centuries. What did you make, little star? I asked, letting her pull me toward the garden. A song, she said proudly, for the welcome ceremony tonight. It has parts for humans and vampires and even the Fae delegation that's coming next month. We stopped beside the memorial garden we'd planted for Elena and my father. Their graves were side by side, marked with simple stones that somehow felt more permanent than any elaborate monument could have been. I think they would have liked each other, Lily said, following my gaze. Mama would have liked your papa. I think you're right, I said, and meant it. The dreams I'd been having lately, not nightmares anymore, but gentle memories shared through the magical bond, had shown me glimpses of their friendship during those final terrible days. They'd died protecting what they loved most, and in doing so, had made our current happiness possible. Will you help me practice the song? Lily asked. Always, I said, and she began to sing. It was a new melody, nothing like the haunting lullaby that had brought us together. This was bright and hopeful, with harmonies that seemed to invite everyone who heard it to join in. As her voice rose in the morning air, I felt the fortress responding around us, not with the urgent power of combat magic, but with the warm recognition of a home truly at peace. Other voices joined in from across the garden. Children who had been rescued from various supernatural conflicts, adults who had found refuge within our walls, even some of the vampire residents whose voices added rich bass notes to the melody. This was what we'd fought for. Not just survival, but the possibility of something better. A place where the old divisions didn't have to define the future. Where a half-vampire child could sing alongside human refugees, and nobody thought it was strange. Beautiful, Cassian said, appearing beside us. Elena would be proud. She is proud, Lily said with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who still sometimes talked to her mother in dreams. She told me so last night. I squeezed her hand, feeling the bond between us pulse with contentment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be challenges, as more supernatural communities emerged from hiding, and the human world struggled to adapt. We would face them together. The music ended, and in the silence that followed, I heard something that made me smile. From the kitchen came the sound of Martha humming as she worked, a tuneless little melody that somehow perfectly captured the peace of an ordinary morning in an extraordinary place. Home, I said softly, testing the word. Lily looked up at me with eyes that held depths no 7-year-old should possess, and smiled. Home, she agreed. And as we walked back toward the fortress, her small hand secure in mine, and Cassian's presence a comforting warmth at my other side, I realized that the music box in Elena's chamber had been right all along. The song hadn't ended when she died. It had simply found new voices to carry it forward, new hearts to give it meaning. And now, finally, we were all singing in harmony,